It's been just over a year since Shimano released their latest all-new drivetrain, CUES, which claims to have increased durability, smoother shifting, and maybe most importantly, a lower cost than just about anything else on the market. But ever since it's released, I've had this nagging question in my head, and that is, how does it compare to the already phenomenal Shimano Deore group set? Well, thanks to Jensen USA, today we're finally getting the chance to find out. In just a moment, I'll be taking you along for some back-to-back test loops with each setup. But before we do so, let's real quick talk about the differences between these two budget-friendly drivetrains. Up first is CUES, which is available in 9, 10, or 11 speeds, and all of which are optimized to use a single chainring up front. For this test, we've gone ahead and used the middle tier U6000 10-speed cassette, derailleur, shift lever, and chain, which you can purchase as a kit for just over $200 on jensenusa.com. Our 10-speed version comes with an 11 to 48 tooth cassette and has a combined weight of 1,462 grams or 3.2 pounds. One of the biggest differences between CUES and the drivetrains it's designed to replace is the link glide technology found on the cassette. This machining uses a new tooth profile and shift gate, which Shimano claims lasts 3 times longer and is 3 times smoother than the outgoing Hyperglide cassettes. Another big benefit of CUES is that the 9, 10, and 11 speed cassettes all have the same cog spacing and that the shift levers all have the same cable pull ratio. What that means is that if you're in a pinch because you broke your derailleur on a rock on your Moab trip and you go to your local shop and they don't have a 10-speed CUES derailleur, you can still use a 9 or 11 speed derailleur for that 10 speed setup you already have and maybe go ahead and purchase the correct part later on down the road. I sadly don't have the available parts to test that cross compatibility, and obviously I'm not going to be able to test the claim of the increased durability on my single ride out today. But what I am excited to see is just how smooth and reliable CUES is compared to the already phenomenal Deore setup. Today, we're going to be using the Deore 11-speed M5100 drivetrain. You can pick up a cassette, derailleur, shifter, and chain from Jensen USA for $222, just $20 more than the 10-speed CUES group set. For that, you'll get a slightly wider 11 to 50 tooth gear ratio on the cassette and a total drivetrain weight of 1,394 grams or 3.1 pounds, marginally less than its competitor. The Deore 11-speed cassette uses Hyperglide Plus machining on the teeth, which trades the durability and smoothness of link glide for increased weight savings and faster shifts. Speaking of weight savings, despite having one extra cog, this 11-speed Deore cassette still weighs significantly less than the 10-speed link glide cassette, and it'll be interesting to see if I can notice that difference while out on the trail. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, we at 99 Spokes have been extremely impressed specifically with the 12-speed Shimano Deore setup, and it was actually a winner in both our budget drivetrain shootout and our Shimano drivetrain comparison videos. And I'll put links to both of those in the description if you want to check them out after this. Right now though, I think it's time to go ahead and get these installed on my test bike here and go out there and see how they feel on the trail. All right, first up is the 11-speed Deore drivetrain. And I spent a decent bit of time on 10-speed Deore and 12-speed Deore, but this is actually my first time on the 11-speed setup. And so far, it's exactly what I'd expect. Shifts are fast, shifts are smooth. It's kind of crazy for me to think about how the CUES link glide system is going to be even smoother, but I'm excited to try it out. Our test loop is an area, Central Oregon, called Cascade View. It's about a 7.5 mile loop, kind of blue XC single track, some small little mellow rocky techy stuff, some fun flowy berms and jumps at times. So it should give us a pretty well-rounded idea of, the gear range on these bikes. Does that smaller cassette have enough range on the CUES, as well as any excessive sound from chain slap, which I don't expect. Both of these derailleurs use Shimano's Shadow clutch system, Shadow RD clutch, which works phenomenally as long as you remember to turn it on. I did just check and mine is on, so that's fantastic. But let's just go ahead and start riding and reacquaint myself with the beautiful shifting that comes from Deore. Oh yeah, Quick shifting under load through those rocks, no problem at all. Well, made it to the top, we're on our way back down, and the astute observers among you may have noticed that this is actually a 10-speed XT shifter, which means not only do you get that multi-shifting when you're shifting down your cassette, but also you get 2 shifts with a single push when you're shifting up it. Now, the only reason this is XT is that's just what Jensen had available to them when we reached out to do this test. And the cool thing is that with the CUES setup, they actually make an 11-speed XT shifter there as well. So if you're like me and you can't live without that double upshift, then you're really gonna like the fact that CUES has it. Woohoo! That was ugly. We'll try to clean that up again for round 2. Quick downshifts without a problem. This Hyperglide Plus, like I mentioned earlier, prioritizes shifting speed over smoothness, which is nice when you're on a relatively new trail and you don't know that there's a big climb coming up. And again, there's that double upshift there, which is super handy. Already sandy, it's only May. Oh, so fun. All right, just getting back to the main road here, which means it's time to take off this Deore drivetrain, switch it out for CUES. All right, lap 2. We've now got the 10-speed Link Glide installed, and speaking of installation, that all went super smooth. It had a lot of the same features that you'd find on Shimano's higher end, let's say derailleur, right? Like it's got that bead tension gauge stamped into the back, which is really handy. Now, one thing it didn't have so much is on higher end Shimano derailleurs, it's really easy to actually visually inspect the limit screws, and that just makes setting it up that much easier. That was a little harder on this guy, but I don't think that should negate anyone from buying it. Something that was easier is not only is there a barrel adjuster on the CUES shift lever, but also on the derailleur, which means you have a little bit more room for adjustment when you're first setting it up, as well as that shift cable begins to stretch. Lastly, it's petty, but I've never been a huge fan of the kind of brushed aluminum look of the Shimano cassettes. And the steel cassette on the CUES drivetrain is a really cool, like, kind of platinum-y color. It's not black, but it's definitely not that bright silver. And it looks sick. But that's besides the point. Let's see how it rides. And right now, I can already tell you, yes, the shifting is very smooth. Does it feel 3 times smoother than Deore? I don't know. It feels relatively comparable to me. It is a bit noticeably slower, which again is something that, you know, Shimano is forward and upright about, that it compromises a little bit of speed for that smoother shifting and of course the long-term durability. Yeah, so let's talk shifting, specifically when I'm shifting up gears. In other words, into a smaller cog on the cassette. Like it almost feels like you're not gonna make the shift, you know, like your drivetrain might be a little out of tune, it's not gonna get there, but it's just taking its time. And that's those new ramps that Shimano has put onto the cassette, on the CUES cassette. That is a little slower, but it does get the chain there more smoothly. The term that Shimano uses for that is chain shock. It's essentially the feedback that you get on the pedals from shifting. There's gonna be less of it on this guy, which, you know, is nice, especially maybe as a beginner rider or more recreational rider who prefers just a smoother riding experience to one that is more performance oriented. Another thing to touch on is the touch points. The shift lever here is just plastic, both the up and down shift lever. You can still shift up a gear by both pushing and pulling the smaller lever, which is nice. but obviously you don't have that double upshift on this, but you can, as I mentioned earlier, get an 11-speed XT CUES shifter, which will work with this 10-speed setup since it has that nice identical lever ratio, cable pull ratio, as well as the cassette spacing. The derailleur isn't quite as like aesthetically or visually sophisticated, I would say, as Deore, let alone SLX, XT, etc. But it still looks good, and I think definitely looks better than, you know, Altus, Alivio, those other lower end drivetrains that this is also replacing. So I mentioned the delayed shift when I'm shifting up a gear. I haven't noticed that as much shifting down. To be honest, it's almost like akin to, it's a weird comparison, entry level to some of the highest end stuff, but akin to like the new Axis transmission drivetrains, where it honestly shifts better under load. That's sort of what this feels like as well, which I think makes more sense on a more beginner entry-level focused drivetrain like CUES than it does on T-type, where I would imagine most people getting a bike with a transmission drivetrain on there are hopefully kind of experienced mountain bikers, though I'm sure there's plenty of folks who get that on their first bike, and hey, all the better for them. But yeah, the way this shifts under load, I can tell already, is significantly smoother than the already smooth Deore. As I'm finishing up the climb, one more thing to talk about is the added cassette weight and the narrower gear range. And I can't notice either one. This 10-speed cassette is about a quarter pound, or I believe about 70 grams heavier than the 11-speed Deore. And it only has an 11 to 48 tooth range. So your biggest gear is 48 tooth versus 50 teeth on Deore, on the 11-speed Deore. And for what I'm climbing today, I'm not anywhere near that largest cog on the back, so it hasn't compromised me at all. But you know, steep fire road climbs, you're an enduro rider and kind of straight up and straight back down, then you would probably notice not having that 50 or 51, 52 tooth granny gear. But for more XC trail rides, I don't think the 1148 is gonna do you wrong at all. All right, so heading back down, and might as well just take a quick second to give a little shout out to my test mule here. This is the RSD Wildcat 125. It's basically, you could call it a downcountry bike. It's got 125 mils of travel in the back, 140 millimeter fork, and I have it set up as a mullet. And this is my go-to bike for this kind of riding. It's a ton of fun on, you know, mellow XC trails, but it's also a blast on more technical, you know, enduro trails. And my personal favorite place to ride it is on jump trails. This bike feels like a BMX bike, and it's a blast. Another cool thing with it is it does have an adjustable chainstay length, so you can run it with a mullet like I have it now, as well as with a 29-inch rear wheel. And it's got a relatively high, here's this again. Woo! All right, I was better than last time. It's got a relatively high bottom bracket, which means that you can actually run it full 27.5 as well, especially if you up fork it a little bit. And I've done that as well. I've turned it into a little slope duro, or as I like to call it, slope country, a little slope style cross country bike. And man, it's a blast for this more kind of, you know, undulating terrain. All right, I'm kind of shifting like an idiot under load. Oh my gosh, like that would have been just wailing away at me if I would have done that on the Deore. Just full pressure on the pedals, multi-shifting, and it did it just fine. I'm not gonna lie, guys, I was skeptical just with how good Deore already is. Is this really gonna be an improvement on shift quality? And I think at least when it comes to downshifting, which is arguably where it matters most, yes, it is definitely an improvement. But that's not to say it's all good, right? You know, you do have that narrower gear range and slight increase in weight. and the finish quality is not as high as Deore. So really, as with all things cycling, it comes down to trade-offs. Do you want to have that, you know, smooth downshift, that durability? I can't overlook the durability, even though we're not testing it today. That's huge. Even though this drivetrain is only $20 cheaper than Deore, if it in theory lasts 3 times as long, man, an exceptional value. So that's what CUES has going for it, but with Deore, you get that, yeah, lighter weight, wider range, faster shifts. So really, it's pros and cons. So I'm gonna finish up this ride, get back to the trailhead, wrap this video up with my suggestions of who I think each drivetrain is for. Who should go with a 10 or 11 speed Deore, and who should go with the 10 or 11 speed CUES. So I'll see you over there in just a second. Don't wash off the cliffside. Oh, here's that section again. A little step up. Fun big berm. Look where you want to go. Nice. So after spending some time today on both the CUES and Deore drivetrains, I think I've got a pretty good idea on which type of rider would be best suited by each group set. Let's go ahead and start with Deore. That Hyperglide Plus machining that is on the Deore cassette is trickled down from the higher end Shimano group sets. That means it's gonna be more race focused, you'll get faster shifts, it's lighter weight, but it is gonna wear more quickly, especially if your shifting technique isn't on point quite yet. And that brings me to CUES. From the beginning, CUES was designed to be the go-to affordable group set in Shimano's lineup. And whether it's good or bad is up to debate, but usually affordability and beginner friendliness go hand in hand in cycling. And that CUES drivetrain is going to be ideal for riders who maybe don't know how to let off the power while they're shifting very well yet, or aren't good at looking ahead on the trail and anticipating a climb, and like to just mash through those gears as soon as they get to the hill. And I can picture a few friends that I've taken on rides who are like that, and I think they would do very well with a CUES drivetrain. Another person who I think would be best suited by CUES is someone who likes to replace their bike every, 5+ years and doesn't really want to have to worry about upgrading components as they go. The fact that you don't need to change your cassette out every, season or 2 seasons is an awesome thing, and that adds tons of value to the CUES drivetrain. Lastly, it is worth noting that there's a pretty good chance that CUES is actually going to replace the 9, 10, and 11 speed Deore options in the near future. So if you're one of those first groups of riders and prefer the shifting characteristics of Deore over CUES, then you should probably head over to Jensen and buy one pretty darn quick. If you have any more questions about CUES, Deore, or really any kind of mountain bike drivetrain stuff, you can leave that down in the comments and I'll be sure to give you an answer. While you're there, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and like this video, as well as subscribe to the 99 Spokes YouTube channel, where we upload a new video every Friday. And lastly, remember that bikes are for everyone. Have fun out there.